So, are you DTFF?
Once again, here's Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football with your host, Jake Trowbridge and Dustin Lunt.
Hey, welcome back to DTFF, everyone. Sorry for the delay if you were patiently waiting for us here on the live stream. Jake was having some technical issues, and if you can't tell, right by my side.
They weren't resolved.
Side by side.
The issues were not resolved. It was resolved with good old-fashioned walking over to my neighbor's house to join his stream. And I think it's working out.
We'll see how it works out. But yeah, we've got a great show. As you can see, we've got some guests returning to the show. Were they here last year for the AFC North?
I don't know. I don't want to get in trouble if they weren't. So I'm just going to
were.
I feel like this is like our third.
I think this is the
Yeah.
third anannual AFC North episode with us.
I agree.
I do too.
Well, good.
Don't
That
worry,
makes me
I'll
feel better.
scroll back in my podcast feed and make sure.
Well, if you're listening, you know who this is because they're in the episode description. But it's a reunion with the BallBlast ladies, Kate and Michelle Magdziuk, coming back on to talk about the AFC North and their beloved Steelers. I'm very excited about this.
Hey, I will say, it feels like we're double dating right now, and I absolutely love it.
I know it's always like Michelle and I on the same end of like a connection. We're always the only people in the same room when we're recording a podcast together. But you guys, I think, are the first people that we've ever co-recorded a podcast with who were in the same room. And I'm so excited that we're breaking barriers here on the
We did this just for you.
Yeah.
This was actually a big old ruse. None of this was necessary, but we just thought it'd make you feel more comfortable.
Dustin actually probably clipped your internet cables just outside your house to make it happen. Dustin, big ups. Appreciate it.
Classic this guy.
That's what I do. Yes. But yeah, we're talking all things AFC North this evening, continuing our divisional breakdown series. I know, ladies, you're going to want to talk only Steelers, but we will sprinkle in the other teams, and you can tell us how much you hate them and why they're going to be.
We are decked out. We got our Steelers cups. We are in Steelers gear. We are ready. But, I also like to talk about the Ravens and the Bengals as well. And unfortunately, we'll have to also mutter through the Browns as well.
Well, look, it'll be a part of the episode. It doesn't have to be a focal point necessarily. I want to call out, I'm wearing the only black and yellow shirt that I own, by the way. That was happenstance. I didn't even plan that, but I'm excited about it now.
Man, you should have said you planned it,
I planned it, and to give me applause now.
Yes, we're very happy to know that you're considering us so intently when you're having on your guests.
Hey, we even have a Najee Harris jersey behind us. We are all in.
What are we, Steelers fans or something? This is crazy.
Weird.
Now, where I did consider you very much was when I decided to get my beverage ready for the episode. Typically I'm a beer drinker. Dustin and I were the beer skis. However, I know that you two are not so much. You two, a little bit more of the White Claw Truly variety. Now, I don't have those, but what I did have was a San Pellegrino and some vodka. So I mixed those two bad boys together and made my own.
Hey, so we're drinking a vodka soda up in here. So we have the same thing going on with some Red Bull. I got to add that. Yeah. What are you drinking, Dustin?
I would have gotten the memo. I'm just being basic and drinking Modelo this evening.
Oh no!
Wait, what I call Modelo this past weekend?
Modelo.
I kept calling it. I was actually really embarrassing. We were like in a big group, and I was like, I really don't want Modelo. I don't want Modelo because I thought that's what we were going to be forced to drink. And Kate was like, "It's Modelo, Michelle."
I'm forced to drink it. Excuse me. No, it is delicious.
I honestly have never even tried it. I've never even tried it. I just
feel like I wouldn't like it. So That's
Based on the name, based on the very accurate name of Modolo, yeah, you wouldn't like that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't like that.
I don't like full beers. Actually, I do like craft beers. All right. Maybe I'd like
Yeah, we're talking
but
ourselves
yeah,
into a hole
yeah.
here.
Anyways, I know you guys have been on before, but just for the fans who haven't heard you, just real quick, how did you guys become Steelers fans? What's the backstory in all this?
So I was raised a Steelers fan. I really had no other choice. My father has been a Steelers fan since the 70s. And then my mom became a Steelers fan when she met him and they got married. So I really had no other choice. And like Sundays were for football. That's it. So we watch football all day long. I watch every single Steelers game. We never missed one. And then when Kate and I met, she didn't even watch football, but I made her a diehard football fan and Steelers fan. I did it.
To be clear, it actually come like it's happenstance that I happen to come from a family of Steelers fans. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, which is literally like smack dab in between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And luckily, I was raised a quote unquote Steelers fan. So I even have some like really old school 90s Steelers sweatshirts that happened to make their way into my adulthood, and now they're very appropriate because they're my favorite team ever. It's amazing.
Perfect.
They were soulmates. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like a Disney movie. It was meant to be.
A really weird Disney movie. Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get into talking about these teams in this division, let's hit up our drunk trade. No fancy graphic because Jake had to screw things up, but at least we can have our little sound bite here.
Drunk, hammered drunk.
Drunk trade of the week.
This week's drunk trade comes once again from Reddit. You lovely, sometimes lovely people over at Reddit. This one from Chris LBC562 says, I traded Tom Brady in a one quarterback league for Jeremy Hill in 2016. I had to try and tie in an AFC North player somehow to this. They say I needed an RB bad, and Hill did little after LOL. It's a painful LOL, I think. Brady kept balling, and I still don't have a legit stud QB in that league. So we went back into the way back machine for this, obviously. For reference, Jeremy Hill, he was the RB22 that year, and then had a total of 163 yards from that point on in his career. He was donezo. Tom Brady, we did the thing for like a decade of this is his last year. No, this is his last year. No, this is, and we just kept going, and Tom kept going, unfortunately for Chris. My question isn't about the trade. We know who won this trade. That's obvious. My question is there a player in the league right now that is Tom Brady-esque in that people are going to keep writing them off for at least another couple years, and they're just going to keep performing? Does anybody spring to mind? Let's start with the two of you.
It's not about writing them off, but I feel like people are going to keep saying every year, oh, this could be the year Travis Kelce dies, right? He gets too old. Like, this is the year. This is the year he shouldn't be tight end one. This is the year he's too risky to take top 5. Like this is like, you can't take him that early because he's too old. Like, no, he's going to keep going until he retires, and he's going to keep being the tight end one. Like, there is no other option.
That was my name, but as like a backup, I feel like I need to shout out Derrick Henry, who just again is another one of those players that year over year, I'm like, his workload has to decrease, right? You would have thought in 2022, his age 28 season, that his workload would decrease, but no, he saw 349 carries last year. Like, the man is 28 and he's old. That is ancient in running back years. And we're giving this man almost 350 carries. That is outrageous. And I like every year I say we have to see a decrease in workload. Don't feel like the Titans are thinking that.
Probably not. He's 28, but his legs are 18. So it doesn't matter. Dustin, anybody come to mind for you?
I have one. He's not high profile like Kelce or Henry, but it's Tyler Lockett. He's one of those guys that he's going to produce every single year until he decides to retire, and he's going to be undervalued, and I'm going to scoop him up wherever I can.
I love it. When I saw this trade, I thought immediately of Keenan Allen. I just think that Keenan Allen is going to be the Larry Fitzgerald of our present times, and I'm scooping him up everywhere. So that was fun. Chris, obviously you lost that. You don't need us rubbing salt in your wounds, but hopefully you learned a valuable lesson from it, and that's all that we need you to take away.
And yeah,
can I name a terrible trade that I did that kind of goes along this line?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So I thought Julio Jones was getting old. I think this was like entering the 2017 or 2018 season or something. It was a long time ago. And I traded Kate Julio Jones. So this was in a dynasty league. And I wanted Jerick McKinnon because this is the year he was supposed to be like so good. He was going to the 49ers. Thought he was going to be great. And then also that who was that wide receiver for the Patriots that was good for like one hot second? I think his name was
Hogan?
Chris. Yes, Chris Hogan.
Oh, yeah.
It was Jerick McKinnon and Chris Hogan. That's who I got for giving away Julio Jones. Those two guys. Julio Jones had a few more good years than him, and those two had nothing in them left.
It's fine.
Nothing.
I traded my first round pick on my first dynasty league ever. My first ever, it would have been my first rookie pick ever. Traded that pick away for Doug Martin. And that pick ended up being Saquon Barkley.
I thought you were going to say Derrick Henry and bring it full circle for a second, but that's still pretty.
Nope.
That's
Nope.
brutal.
No, even better. I traded Doug Martin for,
Mustn't love
or
them
no,
myself.
I traded Saquon Barkley for Doug Martin. So it was a good trade all around. Things happen, man.
Shit happens, guys. And we're just here to try to deal with the mess we leave after.
Or drink the pain away when things don't work out. So that's drinking and talking fantasy football right there.
Baby, look at that. That's the name of the show. All right, we should get into the actual discussion about the AFC North.
Now, do you guys want to start with your Steelers, or do you want to save them till last and finish strong?
We can go whatever order you guys want to go in.
I think we lead off big. We lead off with these Steelers, and we get going out of the gate.
All right. So just as a reminder to all of our listeners out there, I'm going to go through notable, in quotes, of losses and additions that the teams had and quickly go through their draft picks before we really start digging in deep here. So Steelers, they finished third in the division at 9-8 last year. Notable losses, Steven Sims Jr. and possibly Benny Snell, who has not re-signed with the team as of yet. Notable additions.
God, no.
Allen Robinson joins the wide receiver group, and in the draft the only fantasy relevant player was in the third round, tight end Darnell Washington. So knowing that your Steelers, I mean, they finished above 500 third, kind of a tougher division here. How are you feeling about your team looking ahead here for 2023?
I'm actually feeling better than Kate is. I think they're going to be above 500 again. They need to get to those 10 wins instead of 9, but I think they could be a playoff contender this year if Kenny Pickett looks like he did in some of the games at the end of last year. I have no faith in Kenny Pickett at all, but there were a couple games at the end of last year where he surprised me and he showed some flashes that he could be better than just meh. Like I always just thought I didn't like Kenny Pickett as a prospect, and I nearly cried when the Steelers took him because I just relate him to Derek Carr, where you're just the most mediocre quarterback in the league. And that's not ever going to win you anything. But I will say there was a couple games there. Pickett showed a little something. He did. So if he can take those steps forward, the line's better. Najee can get going. And TJ Watt is back healthy and the defense really steps up again this year. I think they have a chance to be decent.
That's a lot of ifs, Michelle. You just listed out. You're like, if
you got to talk yourself into your favorite team being good, or else what is life to live for?
I'm more of a cautiously optimistic person. Like, yes, low key. I don't know if anybody's ever heard this fact. Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season. Never. And I do think this team is a better team than they had necessarily in 2022. But Matt Canada, big concern, right? Like absolutely handcuffs this offense top to bottom. Kenny Pickett showed a lot of flashes, but like on a play-to-play basis, didn't give you a ton. Like the consistency wasn't there. Had some really good moments that I think showed maturity beyond a rookie, but in between, it wasn't like he was producing but making a ton of mistakes. there wasn't a lot of substance there in between some of these big moments. And yes, big moments, 100% important, but you can't rely on big moments. And I feel like those are kind of almost as volatile as like touchdowns. I'm not going to draft a player like Jamal Williams just because he scored a lot of touchdowns. Those can be kind of fluky. Yeah, those big moments I think are kind of fluky for a guy like Kenny Pickett. I'm skeptical. I think the team is probably going to do similarly to how they did last year. Diontae Johnson, I think, probably the one fantasy guy that I'm really interested in just based off of ADP. But outside of that, I don't know what to make of this team. And Michelle, you're definitely more optimistic than I am.
For sure.
Well, yeah, let's talk about touchdowns for a second. And let's talk about Diontae Johnson and his 0 from last season. I feel like that has given him this nice value decrease, or rather, I guess, increase in value, decrease in ADP, whatever you want to say, coming ahead for this year and in dynasties. Couple that with his drops that he has become known for on the internet. Does any of that scare you? Are you excited to maybe get him at a value?
Listen, his drops are so overblown. I can't handle it. Like his percentage isn't any higher than anyone else who gets 147 targets. Like I feel like they always come in prime time is the issue. So everyone's like, oh, and if he drops the ball, all hell breaks loose. If Jamar Chase drops the ball, which he has a very high percent, no one cares, which I get it because at least Jamar Chase makes a lot of big plays and Diontae does not. But like, there's not a wide receiver that you're going to get at better value in PPR leagues than Diontae Johnson. His targets over the last 3 years, 144, 169, and 147. His catch percentage went way down with Kenny Pickett. It was at 58% compared to 63% in 2021. And surprisingly, his yards per reception were the lowest of his career. We thought it couldn't get any worse than Big Ben throwing him the ball and like that short offense, but it turns out it's just the Matt Canada offense. There is no room for yards after the catch for these wide receivers with George Pickens or Diontae Johnson. Every single target is to the sideline and they have no space to do anything else. Like they have to make a hard catch to begin with because it's, there's a lot of defenders near them, or right on the sideline, you have to make a toe tap and then you're just done after the catch. And I having these Steelers wide receivers is not going to be fun this year.
So no George Pickens love is what I'm hearing. No excitement about the big play potential of a big George.
But again, so Jake, going back to what I said, yes, the splash plays, exciting. The big plays, the big moments, yes, incredible. And I think George Pickens showcased a lot of really special skills, right? Again, the toe taps, when you think of some of the best toe taps and toe drags of 2022, you think of George Pickens because he had so many really special moments. But again, in between those plays, what was he offering? And I don't feel like it was something that is going to necessarily earn him a fantastic target share. Diontae Johnson is a guy that I think overall better route runner, just better overall reliable wide receiver. That's the guy that I'm going to go to down after down. Kenny Pickett, if you need a guy to go up and make a splash play with a contested catch, he might be your guy. But again, those plays are so hard to rely upon on a weekly basis. So maybe in best ball.
Yeah. So that's the thing with George Pickens is he can make really nice plays, and he did make a lot of nice plays, a lot of them in, again, prime time. So I think his cost is going to be too high. People are very excited about George Pickens, a guy who only had over 90 receiving yards in one game last year, and it was in week 4. So that was a very long time ago where he even had a huge game or a big game for a fantasy wide receiver. He doesn't get a ton of targets. He just gets, those deeper receptions kind of. So it didn't score a lot of touchdowns last year because nobody did. But I think Pickens is going to cost too much. So if I'm taking one of these guys, I'm taking the value at Diontae Johnson because I do think he will go after Pickens.
And that's just because of volume. It's really hard to rely on any of these guys. Kenny Pickett threw 7 touchdowns last. I feel like that's an underreported stat. 7 passing touchdowns, and never had a game where he threw more than 2. And now Like, so if I'm going to invest in one of these guys and I'm not banking on touchdowns, Diontae Johnson finished as the wide receiver 28 and scored 0. Give me Diontae Johnson just based on the fact that he hasn't had a season with fewer than 140 carries and targets in any of the last 3 years. I'll take the volume.
And do you care at all about the Allen Robinson signing? Is he just more of a depth piece at this point?
He's disgusting for this offense. It's like Kenny. It's like Kenny Golladay going to the Giants. You knew that combination was just the worst. He can't separate. That's never been something like he's been known for. But since the injuries, he's like really bad at separating. And he's coming to an offense with Matt Canada, who could never draw up a play to get guys open to save his life. Like the least creative offensive coordinator. Nobody's ever open. So this system for Allen Robinson could not be a worse combination. I want nothing to do with him in fantasy.
Okay.
Gross. When Kenny Golladay went to the Giants, I said I wouldn't even draft him if he fell to like the 14th round. It turns out that was a good plan.
Not draft him even if there's a fire.
Like,
what'd you say?
Not going to draft him even if there's a fire. I won't do it. I refuse.
Yes.
Well, let's talk. This is maybe a more interesting question than is about the tight ends, because I've been a Pat Freiermuth guy. I feel like I need branded apparel for Pat Freiermuth. However, Darnell Washington falls in the draft due to his medicals. Steelers pick him up in the 3rd round. Now, I see 2 different worlds with him and 0 in between. It's either go on that offensive line and just block, baby, or like, let's actually utilize you as this amazing pass catcher that you are, but I don't see a gray area. So do you have a read on which version of Washington we'll get?
I think in his rookie season, it'll be mostly the blocking version, where maybe in the red zone where they struggled so much last year, like around the goal line, they can utilize him there because he's so big. So maybe that does hurt Freiermuth a little bit, but I still think Freiermuth's a good value in fantasy drafts. And he would be the one guy in this passing offense that I would be most interested in. And I think like he can still do it with Kenny Pickett and in this offense. And no, Darnell Washington doesn't scare me off of him. But I do love the pick for the Steelers.
I love the pick. It really does feel like you're adding a piece, a very versatile offensive lineman. Because, like, if you're going to look at Darnell Washington, like, yes, athletic metrics off the chart. Like the draft did, I think, a lot and opened up a lot of people's eyes to that fact. But generally speaking, like, where I want him contributing the most is probably the offensive line. Just such a solid blocker all around that, we've needed that. We've needed some help for a long time, and now we get it.
Woo! Yay.
Well, anything else to wrap up the Steelers? Do you have any other under the radar players, any sleepers from your team that we should be aware of? It doesn't sound like it, but I want to be sure.
Nothing to do with under the radar players, but Najee Harris, I do think it will be good value this year because people are, I feel like after his first 2 years, scared off of him. He's going to be going in the RB2 range pretty easily. Like you can get him well after all the top guys go. And he was dealing with that foot injury for a lot of the first half of the season. So weeks 1 through 8, 13.5 carries per game, under 11 fantasy points per game. And then weeks 10 through 18. So they had a week 9 bye. So after the bye, when he had a little bit more time to rest up and get fully healthy, his carries went all the way up to 18.2 carries per game and then 15.1 fantasy points per game. So a big jump there. 15.1 fantasy points per game is not like amazing, but it's still plenty good enough for an RB2 spot. So I think he's a really good value, especially with the way they've worked on making their offensive line better. And just if Najee is healthy, I think could be a steal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I would love to be able to see him drop from where he was being drafted last year in redraft and grab him at a value.
And he should a little bit.
I think he drops a lot.
He's just not. He's not
the sexy pick. Nobody wants him. Mm-mm.
That's fine. I don't want sexy players on my team, so I will snag them up all day.
Only ugly players for Dustin.
I didn't.
I
say
just get
that.
too jealous. So I like I try to avoid the sexy players because I don't want anybody looking at my assets.
That's right.
Ooh. Well, Dustin's going to be very sad because this next team has a whole lot of sexy players that we're going to have to talk about with the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, they finished first in the division at 12-4. Notable losses: Samaje Perine and Hayden Hurst, and additions to the team of Irv Smith and Trevor Siemian, if that makes an impact. And then in the draft, in the 4th round, wide receiver Charlie Jones. In the 5th, running back Chase Brown. And in the 6th, wide receiver Andre
Iosivas?
Nice work,
Okay.
Jake. I'll take it.
I don't know if
'cause
that's correct.
I would have butchered that.
Okay.
So coming off, I think it's back-to-back AFC North titles, made deep runs in the playoffs, got, one of the best trios of wide receivers in the league. I think you could argue, if not the best. Still have what should be Joe Mixon playing at a semi-high level. Forgive me as I roll my eyes as I say that.
This is an all anti-Joe Mixon podcast.
Yeah,
right
you
now,
know,
by the
yeah.
way.
I'll be hating on Joe Mixon a little bit here, so that's completely fine.
So as far as fantasy assets go, the Bengals are one of the teams that you want to invest your chips in. I guess the first question is, do you see them not repeating as AFC North champs? Barring any sort of catastrophic injury to players or whatnot, but how do you see them playing out this next season?
I think Joe Burrow is by far the best quarterback in the division. So, I understand that Lamar Jackson's very talented and he's a very good regular season quarterback, but I just think Joe Burrow just has another year to get better with these 2 wide receivers, and they're still going to win the division. And then I think it comes down to the Ravens and the Steelers to be second place, and the Browns, I'm hoping to still just stay the lowly Browns.
Yeah, I think the division does belong to the Bengals, but I do think that the Ravens, it feels like everybody's discounting them so entirely from the conversation that it wouldn't surprise me if this team just kind of kerplunked out of nowhere and doinked the Bengals on the head.
See, I'm not worried about the Ravens. Just not.
See, I think you're definitely.
We can talk about them when we get to them, but I think the Bengals take this division yet again. Probably are in the AFC Championship yet again. They're just a really good team. I will say they lost both their starting safeties, so that could come into play. But
I think the question's probably more on defense, but when you sign Orlando Brown in the offseason, that move to me feels so much more monumental than it's such a huge move. Protect your quarterback, and they did finally, and I think that's going to be really big for this team who has year over year had that consistent issue.
Well, let's talk about the quarterback. This is weird. It almost feels like Joe Burrow could be a value in some small way come redraft, because there's a top tier for fantasy because he's not perceived as a rushing quarterback. And so I feel like he falls a little bit lower than perhaps he should. Will you have any shares of Joe Burrow? I know he's still going to go relatively high for a quarterback, top 6 for fantasy for ADP, but is he somebody that you'd be interested in targeting come redraft?
It depends on where he's at and what my team looks like. I feel like Burrow probably won't be on many of my teams just because, like you said, the consistency with the scoring is too up and down because you never know when it's going to be a Joe Mixon game, or they really like to run it far too much for the talent they have in the passing game. And then, some games Joe Burrow is going to go off, but you don't have that safety net of his rushing yards or rushing touchdowns. That I'll Justin Fields, I would rather have him. They're probably going to go around similar spots there. And I understand that Joe Burrow is the much better quarterback in real life, but Justin Fields has a higher ceiling somehow and almost a safer floor than Burrow does in this upcoming year for fantasy. So I'd rather take that.
Yeah,
Fair
3
enough.
career
Mhm.
games for Joe Burrow with more than 40 rushing yards, which isn't like it. I mean, 40 feels like, a really high mark, but in terms of establishing a nice safe floor with your rushing, it
But only 5 games with more than 26.
Amateur
so
numbers.
yeah, like
You
it's
gotta pump
not.
those numbers up, Joe.
Yeah.
You're not going to get any safety here, but like just from a standpoint of like, if you're not going to draft a rushing quarterback for fantasy, you better have an elite passer, and you better have an elite passer that has some elite weapons. And
I think
Joe Burrow fits that description.
This is what I should say. If you draft Joe Burrow, you're going to be just fine. He's going to be great. Like, he's going to be just fine. I don't know if he has like
league winner.
Yeah, I don't know if he has that league winner potential. And I don't know if he has the potential to be the quarterback 1 in a season, like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes or a Jalen Hurts, who have that rushing upside. Like, even Patrick Mahomes has way more rushing upside than Burrow does.
Yeah, he's got the scoop.
It's true.
Yeah.
Lots of scoop.
Do
we have to talk about Joe Mixon? Do we have to do it? Let's just do it. Let's
Yes.
just rip the Band-Aid off. Let's just do it. So,
That's the
is he
whole
going to be
reason
there?
I joined the podcast.
Is he going to be there by default as their number 1 guy? Is there room for him to get moved? If he stays there, what are we doing with him?
Listen, I don't know why they would keep him, because they can cut him and save a lot of money. But at the same time, like, if they don't have any plans for the money, then maybe not. But there's Ezekiel Elliott out there. There's Leonard Fournette. There's Kareem Hunt. Possibly Dalvin Cook. Like, any of these guys, I'm not saying they're going to be better than Joe Mixon, but they'll do exactly what he can do. And they're going to be much cheaper than what Joe Mixon is going to make this year. So I don't know why you wouldn't just like change those out, because I don't know. He is the definition. If you look up the definition of mediocre running back in the dictionary, his picture would be right there. But the issue is he always has that one huge game every single season. He has the one huge game that he goes off where it very much like skews his end of year fantasy numbers. He did that again this year in week 9, 55 points. Okay, well, that's going to change everything. There's only 17 weeks in the or 17 games in the fantasy season. So it's like, yeah, that's going to skew some things, but he's meh until those games. So this is a fun little note. He scored more than 18 fantasy points in PPR league twice all season long. Do you want to know the guys that also did it twice this past season? Kenyon Drake. Well, he had more than that. So okay. Yes. But Kenyon Drake, James Robinson, Jeff Wilson, CEH. You know who had more? Samaje Perine. He had 3 such games in the same backfield as Joe Mixon with way less opportunity. It's just, there's nothing fun about Joe Mixon. Like, the best of the best, Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, CMC, Henry, they all had 9 and 8 such games with more than 18 fantasy points last year. Mixon had 2. He's a good. Fine RB2, but he's going to be more expensive than he should be. Like he always is. And people are going to hype him up as a potential RB1 this year. No, he's never going to do it.
19 running backs have had at least 500 rushing attempts over the last 3 seasons combined. He ranks 16th out of those 19 in scrimmage yards per touch. He is one of only 2, and I will say the only other one is Najee Harris, to average under 4 yards per carry in that same span. He's so dependent on volume, and now he's going to be 27 this week, or this weekend. No, not this weekend.
Happy birthday, Joe.
Whenever the hell that is, he's going to be 27 this season. And like, he's averaged 14 points per game in his career that far. Like, not great, not terrible, but like when you're looking at the history of aging running backs, and yes, 27 is kind of old for a running back, especially one that has a significant amount of touches. There have been just 9 running backs to average more than 14 fantasy points per game since 2015. Derrick Henry, LaShawn McCoy, Mark Ingram each had 2 seasons where they averaged more than 14 points per game at that age. And the rest, they're elite. Like, these are elite players. And Joe Mixon, to this point in his career, has not lived up to the hype of the potential and talent. It's not worked out. And I don't know why we're banking. Like, the one outstanding season he had, he scored a crap ton of touchdowns. And
My prediction is that one of Fournette, Hunt, or Zeke are Bengal by the time we hit week 1.
I don't want Zeke to be a Bengal. I don't want Zeke to be anything more than happy. Just be happy at home, Zeke, but don't bring it onto a football field right now. I would love Leonard Fournette to be there, on the other hand. Let's say he moves. Is Chase Brown of any borderline interest to you, or Travion Williams, or any other running back?
Captain America,
Chris Evans.
definitely Captain America.
So I what do you guys think about Chase Brown? I feel like that would be one of those just flyer picks and see what happens. But are you guys excited about him if Joe Mixon weren't to be there?
I'm excited from the perspective of what Samaje Perine did. Like, there is a world where another guy could prosper in some small way, and it costs nothing to get him on your team. So for that, he'll be on my dartboard at the end of the draft, but I don't expect a ton.
Yeah, same. And I don't see him as being a guy that they would give a full workload to. So I think, as you were saying, they're going to bring in someone else, whether it's one of these other free agent backs or bring someone up off the practice squad or whatever. He won't be the only feature back in that backfield. I mean, he just didn't get the draft capital to be that guy.
Would there be a grosser backfield than Joe Mixon and Kareem Hunt together?
No.
Stay out of the clubs, ladies, if they're in there. Oh, that would be rough.
Oh, God. Horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it's not horrible. They're wide receivers. We should actually give some. I mean, Jamar Chase. Do we need to talk about Jamar Chase? No.
Nope.
Are we going to? Yeah, because he's awesome. Just real quick, a simple this or that. Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson this year?
Justin
Jefferson.
Okay. All right.
I agree.
It's probably as much as we need to talk about Jamar Chase.
I do have a different question, though. Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson in Dynasty, not just for 2023?
Same answer for me, Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, same.
Even though Kirk Cousins could be gone. Kirk Cousins could be gone after this year, and you would expect Joe Burrow to be with the Bengals for like a long time.
I'm not scared. I try not to tether my wide receiver value to whatever potential quarterback situation might be. I try to just let it flow based on talent alone. I might need to reevaluate that process, but that's what I'm sticking with for right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair.
All right. T. Higgins?
He's good.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything else to say? I mean, he's on the last year of his contract, right? And I know there's been talks about him getting extended.
I thought he had been confirmed to be extended. No?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I don't know.
I've seen nothing about T. Higgins' extension.
Obviously, if he does get extended, that's huge for the organization and for Joe Burrow having him locked up because he's a wide receiver one in his own right. Again, not much to talk about there with him because he's just good. Yeah, he's just.
I will say it still feels. You mentioned him being, a wide receiver one in his own right. He's not drafted that way. I think in Dynasty, his value might still be that way. Although everybody seems to think that T. Higgins is 100 years old. He is like a year older than Jamar Chase, I'm pretty sure. But people just think that he's like an elder statesman. So in Dynasty, especially, is he somebody where you would rather at value try to capture him as opposed to Jamar Chase? Or you're just saying, screw it, give me Jamar Chase? No matter what.
Screw it, give me Jamar Chase. I was really high in T. Higgins last year, thinking that he could like stay right there with Chase. And I think the Bengals proved last year that Jamar Chase is their dude, and he is that dude, and he's one of the best wide receivers in the league. So while both were on the field from weeks 1 through 7 to start the season, Chase was getting over 10 targets a game, while T. Higgins was at 6.3. Chase saw 27.7% of team targets. T. Higgins saw just 16.5. And then Chase saw 33% of the team red zone targets, while T. Higgins was at just 12%. And then T. Higgins had those big games with Jamar Chase out. That was fantastic because he is a really good wide receiver. He could be a wide receiver one on a team. But as soon as Jamar Chase came back and they played those last 6 games together, including the playoffs, all those numbers came right back down. Actually, Jamar Chase's percentage of team targets went up to 28.5%. T. Higgins did go up a little bit too, but still we're just at 19.7 for one of those top 12, top 10 wide receivers. You really want that up above like 22%, 23%. So I'm kind of off T. Higgins now at his cost because he's still one of those really highly regarded wide receivers, as he should be. He's very talented. And if Chase were to ever go down, he'd be great. But while both are healthy, I just don't think T. Higgins is worth the cost.
Yeah, I think Jamar Chase, like far and away wide receiver one. But I do think like there's enough room, especially with the talent of Joe Burrow and his efficiency as a passer, to have both of these on your fantasy team. Like, I think I would be perfectly fine rostering both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins on the same roster and starting them on a weekly basis, because I think there's just enough production for both of these guys to have a relatively high ceiling and a safe floor.
Have you guys ever done that before, where you have the quarterback of a team and his two wide receivers?
I've done it exclusively in best ball. I'm too scared to do it in the regular world. In best ball, I love it. Everywhere else, I'm too timid. Have you?
I think I did it. I definitely had Antonio Brown and Juju in the same year where Juju went off. What was that, 2018? I may have had Ben also that year because I remember living and dying off the Steelers, but I had such a good fantasy season that year because I had both of them and they both just were fantastic. So
it's very dangerous to put your eggs in that one basket, by the way. Not only your fandom, but then your entire fantasy life all gets boiled into this one team. That's scary.
It's toxic. It's totally toxic.
I know, but it was a really fun season that year. They didn't end up making the playoffs, but it was the most fun season I remember in a long time.
I love it.
All right. One last question here for the Bengals. With Irv Smith coming to town, does it do anything for you? I know people were excited about, oh, this is finally at a tight end coming to Cincinnati. It's like the one piece that they're, missing there on offense. And do you care at all? Or is it just Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and that's all we really care about?
I mean, has Irv Smith ever stayed healthy for more than a quarter? More than a quarter. But also, I feel like people think Hayden Hurston more than he did last year in this offense. He averaged 7.9 fantasy points per game in PPR. That was the same amount as guys like Jordan Akins and Tyler Conklin. Like, were you pumped to play those players? No, you weren't. So I don't know. I don't care about Irv Smith. He's not even one of those guys I'm looking at late.
Here's the thing, though. Joe Burrow, since 2020, second lowest tight end target rate among all quarterbacks with 500 or more passing attempts, ranked 32nd out of 37 of those qualifying quarterbacks with just 5 targets to the tight end position per game. Like, the thing is, when you have an elite wide receiver core, like we haven't even talked about Tyler Boyd, we haven't talked about Charlie Jones. Like, these are also talented receivers.
And they also use their running backs. Like, there's just not enough targets to go around. And there's no way the Bengals are going to be like, we need to get Irv Smith his targets. Like, that's not going to happen. And that's just not a tight end I'm going to chase.
Yeah, I just think there's too many other options for a guy that doesn't seem to inherently favor the position. Like, I'm not looking to invest. I think there are higher upside options elsewhere that are going to cost you similar draft capital.
Trade Irv and Dynasty for a couple of thirds if you can get them. That's my move. That's my big advice.
Yeah, same. All right, let's move on to the Ravens here. They were second in the division at 10-7. They lost again. Notable in quotes here: Sammy Watkins, Demarcus Robinson, Kenyon Drake, and Josh Oliver. They brought on board Odell Beckham and Nelson Aguilar. And in the draft, the only fantasy relevant player is first round pick Zay Flowers. So Lamar, oh my God, Lamar, I know names, got his big contract extension, for a day, was the highest paid quarterback in the league. They have a new offensive coordinator coming into town. Greg Roman's gone. What kind of, in conjunction with the new offensive coordinator and this new contract, are you expecting something different with Lamar and how this offense is going to look this upcoming season?
I don't really know, guys. This is the thing. So I feel like people are so excited about Todd Monken coming to the Ravens.
It's because of volume.
Yeah, they're like, oh my God, it's not going to be like Baker Mayfield and the Browns. No way. No way, right? They threw 534 times and Baker threw 21 interceptions and 22. It will never be like that, which was, by the way, his last offensive coordinator job in the NFL. It's, of course, going to be like Jameis Winston, but only in that last year he was with them, not the years prior. No. Only that last year when they had Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then also, are we going to forget that Baker Mayfield threw 21 interceptions, and then Jameis Winston threw how many interceptions? How many?
30?
30, yeah.
Enough that he should have had his own documentary made about it. That's
so
how bad it is.
Those two quarterbacks are who we have to look at with Todd Monken here. So if Lamar Jackson does throw more, that takes away from his rushing. That sucks for fantasy. And then is he going to start throwing touch or interceptions left and right? Like, we don't want that because that's bad for fantasy. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to him, but I'm not personally excited about this OC change like everyone else. It's like he was a pretty good fantasy quarterback with what's his name? Why can't I think of Greg Roman? Like, why are we like, oh, it has to get better with Todd Monken? No, it doesn't. And every single year, it kind of gets worse with Lamar with his passing stats. Every single year, he's regressing in passing stats. Now, rushing, he's still amazing. But and that's really all I'm worried about when it comes to fantasy. So please don't pass more. Please run more in the same amount.
I mean, here's the thing though, like in 2019, in that season where Jameis Winston, he threw
30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions.
No, 33 touchdowns, 30 interceptions. He did have 626 pass attempts. He was, despite those 30 interceptions, the QB3 on the year because of that volume.
Lamar Jackson's never going to throw it 636 times.
I agree. But I'm just saying, like, a boost in the volume paired with what I think is...
Winston also had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And I know people want to hype up OBJ and Zay Flowers. Those two were not even close to what Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were that year.
You have Mark Andrews. Let's not forget Mark Andrews. I'm just saying, I do think this is
Bateman. I mean, come on. They've got all this talent.
The master Bateman is sitting there just waiting for more targets.
They have a bunch of wide receiver twos.
But like a bunch of wide receiver twos is better than I think what Lamar Jackson
He's basically going to be playing with what Patrick Mahomes was playing with last year. Pretty much exactly. Now he's going to have to be just as good as Patrick Mahomes as a passer.
What do you think?
Let's see if he can.
No, he doesn't, because he has a safer rushing floor.
Oh, yeah. I'm just talking about if the OC wants to become way more pass heavy, he's going to have to then prove that he can run an offense with a bunch of wide receiver twos and a great tight end. And,
I just think, like, you have questions about Todd Monken, which is fine. I think that's very fair. And I don't know necessarily how much like volume is going to help or hurt Lamar Jackson, because I do think if you see an increase in volume, you're probably going to see a decrease in efficiency, especially just given historically what we've seen with these quarterbacks.
So 2021, he was averaging 31.8 passing attempts per game, by far his highest in his career. And that's when he had his lowest passer rating, 87.0, really, really bad passer rating for an NFL quarterback. And he only had 16 touchdowns. I know he missed a handful of games there, but he wasn't on pace for very many. 16 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. So again, he didn't play. He missed a handful of games and still had 13 interceptions.
Still the QB7 in fantasy points per game in that instance.
Yeah, he's going to be a good fantasy quarterback.
That's what we're talking. We're talking about fantasy.
It was, what are your expectations for him in his passing
in the context of fantasy?
Now, pair that,
I'm saying I don't want him to pass more.
To pair that with the pass catchers who are going to be greatly affected by this whole change, right? So Mark Andrews, I think we can all agree, still going to be very fantasy relevant, should be the next guy, if not the next guy behind Travis Kelce. However, so we talked about OBJ. We talked about Zay Flowers being wide receiver twos. Rashad Bateman, I have hopes for him, but it's only hope because we haven't gotten to see a lot from him just yet. He's had a lot of injuries that he's dealt with, and he's been in a limited offense. So Hollywood Brown is the last sort of fantasy relevant wide receiver we've seen with the Ravens. And even he was, scraping 1,000 yards to get by. Do you see a path for a single pass catcher outside of Mark Andrews to at least give you somewhat consistent fantasy production, or just no?
The only one I would consider is Zay Flowers, because I think he could do plenty after the catch. I think he can be used as a weapon. he's literally Marquise Brown. So they just basically took him again in the first round, which I guess they just started over and they didn't have to pay Brown. So,
Sure.
I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, but I think
But Brown had some viable fantasy games as a rookie, especially his first game ever. Didn't he have like 200 something yards? So I like, if I was going to take a shot on one of these guys, it's Zay Flowers. I want nothing to do with OBJ, with Lamar Jackson. I don't like that duo. And I give up. I'm Rashad Bateman.
Fair.
Yeah.
Well, running, there's only one thing left to discuss. And if Lamar Jackson's not going to be running it as much, is J.K. Dobbins going to take over that? Do we actually believe that J.K. Dobbins can be what so many have wanted him to be forever, which is like a fringe RB1, if not outright RB1?
Yeah. I mean, I can't wait to see him fully healthy. I just hope he's fully healthy this year. I feel like at the end of, what was it, 2020? It may have been 2020 at this point. He had such a good ending where a lot of his fantasy points came from touchdowns, but that's what you're kind of hoping for, right? The Ravens are a high scoring offense. He has lots of opportunities. You know, he's not going to get a lot of targets, even if they pass more. Like, I don't think they're going to go to him, but he should have a lot of opportunities to score. He's good around the goal line. And last year, he never really had a game with very many carries. His most was actually in the very last week with 7 carries, but he was dealing with injuries. I do actually really like J.K. Dobbins for next year. It all comes down to touchdown volume, which is really risky. But if he can score double-digit touchdowns, which I think is very possible, I can see him being a running back 9 to 14, somewhere in that range. I do think 9 would be like about his ceiling, even with 10 touchdowns. But I think he'll be good at cost. I like him.
I do have like some concerns just from a volume standpoint overall. Like I get it if we're going to take some carries, maybe increase the passing volume, maybe, we're going to have some more rushing volume dedicated to actual like design runs by a running back. But J.K. Dobbins has had one single game in his career with more than 15 carries. Like, he has not been utilized necessarily as a bell cow. And usually when you have running backs that aren't getting, more than 15 carries a game, I want to see some of that supplemented with a role as a receiver. And I just don't think that this is what, unless Todd Monken changes this significantly and sort of changes the like ethos of this whole offense, I worry that like we're just never going to see this ceiling that we want to see with J.K. Dobbins based on some of the flashes. Like, his best games have come off efficiency, which is great because like a stout running offense with a good rushing quarterback should help you be more efficient in your run game. But the lack of like true workhorse role makes me a little antsy.
I will say Todd Monken gave Peyton Barber 234 carries in 2018 with the Buccaneers. If he's willing to do that, then J.K. Dobbins should easily hit that number. And if you tell me J.K. Dobbins has over 225 carries this year, I'm in. I'm all in.
Yeah, but Peyton Barber was elite. I mean, come on. Is anybody going to argue against that?
And for some reason, the team really likes Gus Edwards, and isn't Justice Hill still on the team?
Yeah.
And, is
Gus Edwards still there?
Yeah. He's there and he's back from injury.
So it's one of those things. They seem to really like those two running backs. So I do think Dobbins' ceiling is capped a bit as far as carries wise. And you really are going to be relying on those touchdowns, which hurts my heart to say, because I was all in on Dobbins last year coming back from injury. So I hope, he's injury free and we see the best of him this year, but just with the way they've deployed that backfield in the past, I just don't know if that's ever going to happen.
I'm not going to lie. I thought Gus Edwards was gone. He is one that he's a bug that will not die. He will never be off the Ravens. Wow. So yeah, that makes me a little bit more nervous about J.K. Dobbins because Gus Edwards is good. And they're both the same amount of time away from their injuries. So who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Death taxes and Gus Edwards. Gus Cockroach Edwards, they call him. Speaking of cockroaches, should we talk about the Browns, I guess, for a little bit?
Oh, that seems a little...
Is that too mean?
That's the best transition a podcast has ever.
That's the best what I've ever heard in my life.
All right. So last and least, the Browns, finishing 4th in the division at 7-10. Their losses this year were Jacoby Brissett, D'Ernest Johnson, Pharaoh Brown, Kareem Hunt, and Jesse James. Still not re-signed, but they haven't signed anywhere else, so kind of up in the air. They brought on board Elijah Moore via trade, Jordan Akins and Marquise Goodwin, and in the draft, in the 3rd round, they brought in wide receiver Cedric Tillman and Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback. So let's start with the creepiest guy on the roster, Deshaun Watson. Everyone was expecting him to come back after his almost 2-year hiatus and just be the Deshaun Watson that we saw with Houston. And obviously that didn't happen. Do you see this as just he was working out the cobwebs and working the rust out from not playing football for almost 2 years? Or has he lost a step? I mean, what are you thinking he can reasonably finish as a, fantasy quarterback this season?
So I think he's a human being, right? And even if he did all these bad things, it's going to get in your head when everyone hates you in the entire world and you're hearing all these things and you're playing in these stadiums or everyone's booing you. You would have to be a robot for that not to affect you. So I do think that's the reason he came back, and he was bad. He was honestly bad. He averaged just 15 fantasy points per game. That was less than guys like Carson Wentz, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, Russell Wilson, Marcus Mariota last year. It was bad for him. But prior to his instances and everything I don't want to say he went through, that he put people through, but he was a top 5 fantasy quarterback in 2020, in 2019, and in 2018. He was fantastic NFL quarterback and a fantastic fantasy quarterback because he also offered you a lot of that rushing upside as well. I do think he's going to be better this year. I think he has a nice supporting cast. I think he has a whole off season of, getting right. I don't think the media is going to be the same as last year with all these questions about him. I don't think that the crowds are going to be as hard against him anymore. I think people just wanted to come at him last year, and it's going to die down a little bit. So I do think he'll be better. And I think he's probably a really good option at his cost. I'm not going to be drafting him, but I do think he's probably going to be a pretty solid fantasy quarterback next year. And also he had 2 really solid weeks at the end of last season that was trending up. So 22 points in week 17, 20 points in week 18.
I mean, that's fine. You wouldn't.
Yeah, they're not great for Deshaun Watson or great in general, but they definitely were better than what he started at in his first handful of games.
They weren't Jacoby Brissett numbers, but they were fine. They were okay. Well, the people that he's going to be throwing to there, it is Amari Cooper. And then does anybody have a firm grasp of a real second option as a pass catcher in that offense?
So someone tweeted today, and it was like, how is Elijah Moore ranked so low? Listen, there's no one that loves Elijah Moore more than I do coming out of school. And I still have hope that he'll become something. It hurts me. He went to the Browns, but I'll still root for him. But it was at practice with 0 defense, and the pass was about 5 feet away. And they were like, look at this duo. It's this proves absolutely nothing. This is silly.
Hey,
but,
to be fair, it was a slow-mo pass.
Yeah.
It was edited pretty nicely.
I do think Elijah Moore can have a Will Fuller type season, though, with Watson. He is a very speedy guy. I do think he's a perfect wide receiver to play with Deshaun Watson. If Watson gets back to what he was with the Texans, I do think Elijah Moore has a pretty solid year, and he's going to be drafted very late. Cedric Tillman's an exciting rookie as well, but if I needed to take one of these guys late in the draft, it would be Elijah Moore. And I am very biased because I loved him so much coming out of school. So take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt.
Question though, do we really think that just from a historical standpoint and what we've seen out of Kevin Stefanski's offense, is there really enough passing volume, do we think, to really designate any true number 2 option that's going to be worth it? Looking at what we've seen out of Kevin Stefanski as a head coach or at head coach / offensive coordinator, passing offense ranks in his 4 seasons 30th, 28th, 28th, 22nd that is where, 30th, 28th, 21st. That is where he ranked in terms of pass attempts for his offenses. And like, do we really think that changes this year? Like the running back core, not a lot of depth there, but I also don't think they've done enough with the receiving game to sort of put a lot of stock in that. But I guess,
and I do think a big issue is that he is playing in Cleveland, and Cleveland gets cold very, very fast. Yeah, like you got the month of September, maybe that, and it's going to get cold and very windy and miserable, extremely bad. Like the wind in downtown Cleveland, which is where the stadium is
brutal.
It's something that you've never experienced anywhere else. I've lived in Pittsburgh. I've lived in Syracuse, New York. Like I lived those places. I've also lived in Cleveland, and walking those streets with that wind, it is brutal off that lake. And we saw Deshaun Watson great in Houston, which, by the way, it's a dome most of the time, because even when it was beautiful nights, they don't even open that thing. So that could be an issue. And I do think that's why they like to run more. And looking at Kevin Stefanski, it is a little worrisome in 2019 with the Vikings as OC. He was 30th in pass attempts per game, when we see now Kirk Cousins pass so much lately with a new OC. So yeah, maybe things won't change in Cleveland, and they're just going to stay the gross Browns, and Watson won't get better.
Yeah, I know for me, I mean, it's going to be Amari Cooper, and that's it. As far as the receiving options on that team, I have zero interest. I don't care how late they go. Maybe Elijah Moore, late.
No David Njoku love for late tight end. You
really.
Shouldn't take any tight end advice from me, but I'm just curious. I'm just throwing the question out.
I mean, for me, no. I mean, he had the 6-year breakout finally last year. I mean,
David Njoku came at me on Twitter. He made everyone really mad at me. I remember that, because I said, I was just being funny with Kate, saying like David Njoku is never going to happen, and then he retweeted me.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, he was not.
Was that right before this last season? Was he?
I think so. Which was his last season. I wonder if he printed out my tweet and hung it in his locker. I'm certain of it.
I like David Njoku. I think, like, in terms of a late round flyer, like, there probably aren't a ton of tight ends, I think, that have the kind of upside that David Njoku has had, based on the flashes we've seen, based on his overall athletic profile, just in general. Like with Deshaun Watson, he was fine. Had 5 targets in 4 out of his 5 games with Deshaun Watson. Like, it's fine. It's fine. I think he poses a high ceiling, not because of situation or because of Deshaun Watson, though. I think it's just based on, like, you're betting on the talent of David Njoku, which I think is a fine bet. And
Deshaun Watson, when he was in Houston, made his tight ends there fantasy relevant. Maybe not every single week, but I mean, there were weeks where they would pop off and have really good games. So, he does look the tight end way from time to time. So, I mean, he could be a good late round flyer, but I don't know.
It's just that Houston had like 4 tight ends that they would cycle through, and you couldn't peg which one it was going to be. At least with Njoku, it's like, well, he's the only guy that's probably going to be relevant from that situation.
He's a guy that I probably will have on my teams, like, but he's one that I'm not going to actively seek out. He's somebody that, like, I literally can't even project where he might be drafted next year. Like, but depending on what the board looks like, if he falls to me, and
everyone who's listening, you don't have to worry about it, because you're going to be taking Travis Kelce in the first round, like you should, and you don't got to worry about anything else.
Yeah.
I did want to go back to the wide receiver conversation real quick, because Dustin, I feel like you're just like giving Amari Cooper this pass for being so bad with Watson last year. Are you not worried about that? Like, I think I'd rather, if I'm going to take one of these guys, I'd rather take Elijah Moore in like the last round of my redrafts and
Cedric
take
Tillman
or Cedric, like either one, over taking Amari Cooper where he's going to be going, because his numbers drastically fell with Deshaun Watson. Like, it was pretty good with Jacoby Brissett, right, but I mean, he was only averaging 11.6 PPR points per game with Watson. And I mean, it was mostly due to his reception percentage went so far down. They were just not clicking. He did average a lot of yards per reception with Watson, but like, are we just going to ignore that?
Finished higher, end of the year fantasy finish was higher than I expected it to be or thought it would be. when I saw the end of the season numbers. I was like, oh, Amari Cooper actually had a decent season.
Because you have a low opinion of Amari Cooper, I think, in general, historically. So you've come around. But now you're maybe come around too far.
Maybe.
He
right,
had some nice games with Brissett. It's just like nothing with Watson. And I think Amari Cooper still has too big of a name where he's just not going to drop far enough. And people are just going to, and he's not going to go early, but like, I still don't even want to touch him in the 7th, 8th round, which I think was where he'll go. I'd rather wait till the last round and just take Elijah Moore, who I think could have big games. And I obviously would prefer him in best ball. That would be so I don't have to guess what those big games are. But I do think Elijah Moore will have a couple of those 120-yard games with a touchdown at some points of the season.
A second-rate Tyler Lockett, you might call him, if you were feeling mean about it, I guess. But Nick Chubb, okay, yes, he's going to be good for fantasy. He's the only guy there. Is this finally the year? Because there's nobody else for competition, supposedly. I mean, we're talking.
They have to bring in someone, right?
I don't know.
They have to sign someone else. They cannot go into the season with Jerome Ford, John Kelly, Demetric Felton. Like those can't be the. What happens if Nick Chubb goes down?
40 combined between the three of them. 40 combined career rush attempts. 40 combined. 40 combined.
Listen, if we get into the end of August and
40.
we're drafting, redraft, and this is still the depth chart, fine. Nick Chubb might have a career year in fantasy, 100%. But there's just no way, right? That would be for a team that really has Super Bowl aspirations and they truly think they're a contender. And there's no way you can go into this with just Nick Chubb and nobody.
But if any team's going to do it, don't you think it'd be the Browns?
What'd you say?
If any team's going to do it, don't you think it would be the Browns?
Yeah, for sure. But like, there's too many available running backs out there.
Yeah.
Even like Darrell Henderson's still, they're not even getting touched. They could sign him for vet minimum. And I do think even Darrell Henderson could steal some work away. But the thing is, Nick Chubb's going to be great. Again, just like the entire team, his production went way, way down with Watson before, with Brissett averaging nearly 19 fantasy points per game, with Watson 12. That is 7 points per game different. And you would think like with the colder weather and being at the end of the season, his production actually would have went up, but it didn't because he scored 0 rushing touchdowns with Watson because he was so bad. So you would think that has to get better because his usage really didn't go down and his yards per carry was still good. So maybe we're just so like, I'm overblowing that. Nick Chubb's going to be fine. It's just someone that's not exciting. Why? Why is he not exciting?
He's got no pizzazz.
No receiving upside. That's why.
Yeah, like last year had his best PPR season in his career. Last year, age 27, and finishes the RB6. Like for how good he is, for how productive he is, like was in contention for the rushing title right up until the very end. RB6.
Jake, you know I love to do this. So Nick Chubb or Tony Pollard this year?
I defer to the upside of Tony Pollard. No?
No.
I'm going to do it.
No, give me Chubb.
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. We had technical difficulties over here. What did you say?
No, I defer to the upside of Pollard. Dustin's going with Chubb.
Oh, I would go with Pollard for sure.
Dustin, explain yourself.
I guess I just don't trust Pollard to have a full workload. Where I know Nick Chubb
basically, and with Ezekiel Elliott in town. The beauty of Tony Pollard, he doesn't need a full workload. He's that efficient.
No, he doesn't. I guess I'm just not a believer. I mean,
Chubb or Bijan Robinson.
Oh, give me Bijan. Give me Bijan, baby.
That's too easy.
Spicy.
All right, then one more. Chubb or Jahmyr Gibbs?
That's Chubb for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Full PPR. It's still Chubb?
Yeah.
Who would you prefer on your ballpark hot dog? Nick Chubb or Bijan?
What?
That's easily spicy Bijan. Every time.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
No, I think Nick Chubb's going to be, as you said, Michelle, he'll be completely fine somebody like Jahmyr Gibbs, who I have a lot of trust issues with Detroit. A lot of them stem from DeAndre Swift, so not necessarily Gibbs' fault, but I do have trust issues there, so I would rather rely on the proven workload of Nick Chubb.
See, my trust issues don't come from Swift because I was never high on him, but Kerryon Johnson. I am still scarred from that man. That I like Jahmyr Gibbs has that same type of feeling as Kerryon Johnson did. You just were so excited for him.
I thought we had a low talking about the Browns, but we didn't. You dug a well under the hole of the Browns to talk about Kerryon Johnson. So thank you for that.
Oh, he had such potential.
Sure did. That hot minute.
That's right.
All right. So any last thoughts about your AFC North here in general?
I really don't. I think people are not giving the Steelers enough respect. And I think they're going to be better than everyone thinks. I do think people are very overvaluing Todd Monken. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be bad. We just don't know yet, right? It could be good. It could be bad. But people are only saying it's going to be a good thing. It's like Greg Roman was actually pretty good for Lamar Jackson in fantasy. So those are my two biggest takeaways.
My biggest takeaway is I do think this is going to be one of the hardest divisions in the NFL when I'm doing my full team projections. This is the division that I feel like I'm going to struggle with the most. I haven't started that process yet, but I am going to be on pins and needles projecting the AFC North because it feels like the range of outcomes is insanely huge with every single team in this division.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
I'm scared for you.
All right. Well, I think that'll about do it for this week. Why don't the two of you shout out whatever you want to do or whatever you're working on, things you got going on here, where people can find you, all that good stuff. This is your time.
Our time to shine, baby. I'm Kate Magdziuk. You could follow me on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. It's KateMagdziuk. Remember when I used to just be FF BallBlast? Those are the good old days. But you can follow me on Twitter, follow me wherever, and check out my work at Gaming Society.
Did you want to bring up BallBlast?
Oh, yeah. We do this podcast, this little podcast. It's called BallBlast. And it's Michelle and I, and we talk about fantasy football, betting,
all things NFL, but BallBlast is one word. You can find us on any of your podcast apps. It's just us two talking and chilling and having fun and drinking. It's a good time. And I have a 49ers podcast. I know, very random because I'm a Steelers fan, but I've gone to the dark side. I'm also a 49ers fan at this point, but it's called The Gold Standard. It's an awesome podcast. So if you are interested in the 49ers whatsoever, come find us, listen to us. I'm on the Friday shows. It's called Gold Diggers, but all the shows are great each day. So 49ers fans, come hither.
Thank you guys for
I
having
don't think
us
I've ever
on
said
again.
come hither.
Is
that even what it means? Is that what it means?
I don't know if it's one I'd keep in the repertoire necessarily, but you tried it. There's something.
No, that one's going in the that's
Okay.
going in the vault, and it's staying there. But we're honored to have joined you guys yet again to discuss the AFC North. I can't wait to come back next year and talk about the
Steelers
North.
being AFC champions.
Wow.
There you
Next
go.
year, the internet's going to be so bad that both of us are going to come out to yours, and we're all going to record in the same
There we
room
go.
together. That's what's going to
Let's
happen.
go.
It's overdue.
It sure is. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming on. Jake, is there anything you want to say before we sign off here?
No, man, this was delightful. Thank you for coming on for this delightful little reunion that we had.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming on. As always, folks, give us a rate, review wherever get your podcasts. Subscribe to us on YouTube here, wherever, so you can find us when we go live and all that good stuff, all of our video clips. But that'll about do it for this week. We'll be back next week, continuing our divisional breakdown series. Hopefully have some more amazing guests lined up, Jake, I hope.
Yeah.
We should have more amazing guests. And we'll just talk to you next week, folks.
Cheers, FFers.
Bye, y'all.